Greeting to you all. My name is Mahdi Omar. This is the African Television Network of New England. Patrick Loch Otieno Lumumba is a Kenyan who served as the director of Kenya Anti-Corruption Commission from September 2010 to August 2011 and is currently the director of the Kenya School of Law since the year 2014. An eloquent lawyer, he holds a PhD in laws of the sea from the University of Ghent in Belgium. He is also a staunch Pan-Africanist and has delivered several powerful speeches all over the world alluding to African solution to African problem. He is an admirer of Patrice Lumumba and Thomas Sankara, the deceased and assassinated revolutionary leader of the Democratic Republic of Congo and the Burkina Faso. He is also remembered for his emotional-laden and energetic speech in Uganda at the Third Anti-Corruption Convention. Now it's time to hear some word of wisdom from today's future guests about Pan-Africanist movement, the second scramble of Africa, and what exactly happened to him in Zambia. Ciro Ninja is also joining us today. He is the founder of African Center for Fraud Prevention and a certified fraud examiner. Welcome to our studio, my fantastic friend and guest, Professor Patrick and Ciro.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Yes, Ciro, thank you for coming. Yes. I'm really delighted and honored that you are in our studio, Professor Patrick. I am almost really addicted to your YouTube video and teaching. I'm just wondering, while you are giving a lecture in all over the world, either meeting a prime minister or president, do you understand the magnitude of your influence and contribution to the African at home and African diaspora? I am checking you literally every day in the basement of Boston. Do you really, do you know that when you meet presidents and prime minister, somebody here in the basement is actually learning from you?
That is very humbling. Of course, when one is making one's contribution, one does not go out measuring the impact, but as one continues to travel across the different parts of the world, one begins to appreciate that the message is being embraced by different cadres of the society. And I think that is both very humbling and fulfilling. It means that the message we are spreading is one that is relevant, is one that has an impact, and is one that can, in many ways, spur change in the right direction. So I'm humbled.
Yes, thank you very much. Ciro, almost Not only that, you love and respect Professor Patrick. You try to clone him. You try to almost behave like him.
Yeah, I think Professor Lumumba has been a wonderful father,
Yes.
mentor of mine, and he's really been positively involved in the new Africa, in an Africa where we all as African youths can go back home someday and make that change that we need. So I think I really look up to him, and I'm so honored to sit next to him.
Yes, me too, my friend. You know, when I heard Professor Patrick Lumumba deported from Zambia,
Yes.
I thought it was a fake news. It's almost unbelievable. Professor Patrick Lumumba and the deportation is anomalies. They don't go together. Tell us exactly what happened. The vice president of Zambia, to the speech she gave to the parliament, she said, we actually did not deport him, but denied him an entry. Really?
Which is true. as a term of art, she is right in saying that I was denied entry. And as a lawyer, I think that distinction is quite important. That we were invited, I was invited to Zambia to preside over a graduation on the 30th day of September. And in the evening before the graduation on the 29th, I was to speak at an open forum where the subject was the increasing role of China in Africa. So when I was denied entry, I entered the Kenneth Kaunda International Airport and alighted from the airport, from the plane. And as I walked towards the immigration, six individuals, ladies and gentlemen, came to me and told me that we have been instructed by the highest authority to deny you entry into Zambia. Of course, I politely inquired, and they said it's for security reasons. And I joked with them, is it my security that is under threat, or the security of the people of Zambia, of the leadership of Zambia? But beyond that, I did not argue with them, knowing better that discretion is the better part of valor. And I went back to the plane, flew back to Nairobi via Harare. So all else is a matter of speculation. But it is sad.
Very.
Because Zambia, throughout the ages of high existence, has been in the forefront of the struggle for the liberation of Africa. You'll remember in the heady days of the struggle against the regime of Ian Smith, or the struggle against apartheid, or the liberation movements in Mozambique and Angola. It is President Kaunda and President Julius Nyerere who are in the forefront of leading the fight. And for any African to be denied entry into Zambia is in itself a sad thing, because it really removes the sheen from the Pan-Africanist voice and agenda that we have, that Africa should have the liberty and the freedom to move without let and hindrance. But I believe that the Zambians will have occasion to atone for their sins of commission, and that next time that I'm in Zambia, I'll be allowed to get into the country.
Yeah. Did you try to find out exactly what happened? Is China has some kind of role in it? I'm amazed, because you have been in Dar es Salaam and have given so many ceremonial speech. It was fine. I mean,
I've been in Zambia too.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, last year I was in Zambia twice. And I remember during the conversation that I had with the Zambian people, we had a very engaging and very intellectual discussion on what I described then as the new scramble for Africa.
Yeah.
And when one is talking about the new scramble for Africa, one of the things that comes to mind is the continued presence of China. And I keep on saying that on my part, I don't blame the Chinese, because the Chinese have defined what they want for their people. And it is incumbent upon Africans, through their political leaders, to define what they want for their people, and therefore to engage with China in a symbiotic relationship that will be mutually beneficial for the various African countries. And I do not know what it is that happened on that day, but it is improper to swim in the sea of speculation, because you then say things that may not have happened. We can only remain at the level of speculation. And I would want myself to meet the Vice President of Zambia and to ask whose security was under threat. Was it mine? Can I, one who bears no arms, one who wishes none harm, thinks none harm, and does none harm, be a threat to the people of Zambia or to the government of Zambia? Are you serious? I would want to face her, eyeball to eyeball, and pose those questions.
In fact, she was questioned in Parliament. What she said was, she's not obliged to give detail about security. Period. That audacious.
That is normally when you have no reason to take any action and you regret the action, then you seek refuge in giving minimal information. And I think she must have found herself in that situation. And I think with the help of hindsight, the Zambian government must know that they created a mountain out of a molehill. And if one were to engage them directly, I think they would say, we made a mistake.
Of course.
But it is not in the nature of governments to concede that they made mistakes. And therefore, I do not expect any admission that they made a mistake. But when I get back home, one of the first things that I'm going to do is to write to the President of Zambia through the High Commission in Nairobi to seek several things. One, why did you deny me entry into Zambia? And to seek a clarification as to whether I'm now permanently persona non grata in Zambia, or whether I will be allowed to go to Zambia to see the Mosi-otunya Falls, even on holiday. I think it is important to seek such clarifications going forward.
I think it is their loss not to allow you to come to Zambia. By the way, you were very kind and generous in your response. You were not mad. In fact, you said the great country of Zambia, these are my brothers. You were very professional and diplomatic.
Yes, as we should be. One of the things that I've learned is that when you are dealing with officialdom, you don't behave with the arrogance that inflames their anger, but you conduct yourself with the firmness that opens their eyes. And I believe that that is what will happen in the case of Zambia and her political leadership, that their eyes will be opened and that they will not use political power to deny Africans entry into that great country.
Yes. Definitely, we are also waiting their apology to our professor. Thank you very much. It was in one of your speech somewhere, I'm not quite sure, but you gave the title Africa at the Dinner Table. And for naive observer like me, it sounds magnificent. Finally, we have arrived at the dinner table. But in a very twisted way, at the dinner table, the French are there, the British are there, the Americans are there, and progressively the Arabs are there. But at the dinner table, we are actually a food to be eaten.
Correct.
Explain that.
Once again, one looks at the continent of Africa, which is arguably one of the richest continents on earth in terms of our resources, and one reminisces about history. Africa was subject to slavery in a manner that was very pernicious. We know that over half the population of Africa was taken away from the continent and brought to the United States of America and to Europe and various parts of the world. And that when slavery lost its luster and value, Africa was colonized, and once again her peoples were subjugated. And after the process of decolonization, we are aware that there were very active and subterranean acts of neocolonization. And one remembers that on the eve of independence, Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah was as passionate as he was eloquent in telling Africa, look forward, look neither east nor west. And I think to understand Nkrumah correctly was saying that we must use our newly acquired independence to harness our resources for the best interest of the peoples of Africa. What one sees now is a new scramble for Africa. Yeah. And that new scramble is one that sees a very energized China, an equally energized France, an equally energized United Kingdom, and quite a number of Arab countries. And they are all coming to Africa, which is the confluence. But the question is Africa benefiting from this newly found scramble for her? And my thesis and my argument is that on the basis of the evidence that we have, Africa is not benefiting. How? You look at the resources of the Democratic Republic of Congo and look at a single item, coltan or rare earth as we call it, which is to be found in every fund that we use. Yeah. It is not the Congolese who are using it. It is the Chinese and others. Look at the uranium in Niger. Look at the copper in Zambia. Look at the oil and the natural gas. And one therefore says, and this is the analogy that I was giving, that we are all at the dinner table, but there are three ways, I said, of being at the dinner table. You are either at the dinner table as a diner, distinguished in that regard, or you are at the dinner table as a waiter serving the diners, or you are food to be eaten. Yeah. And according to my thesis, Africa is food being consumed by all else, and that is a tragedy of gigantic proportions, and that therefore it behooves us as Africans to wake up to this realization and to pull ourselves, if you may, by our bootstraps, so that we graduate from food to be diners. And we can and we should. Why do I think that we can and we should? I think we can because we have the human resources with a population of nearly 1.5 billion, with the natural resources, and with our men and women educated both within and out, without the continent of Africa. We've got to put our act together. And I believe that we can. And in fact, I do believe that one begins to see signs of different African countries in their own modest ways, making baby steps in the right direction. But yet I hold the view that in order to realize our potential, we must act in unison, because there are those who believe that Africa can only be controlled, and they believe rightly, if she is divided. And there is no shortage of other civilizations seeking to divide Africa so that Africans can read from different scripts. And when they read from different scripts, it's the age-old adage that if you divide them, you'll conquer them, will be fulfilled yet again.
Yeah. You know, what is so amazing to me, Professor, I was reading about the biography of President Robert Mugabe of Zimbabwe. And this man is a genius.
Without doubt.
Rhodes Scholar. And also I was reading about Julius Nyerere of Tanzania. And his nickname was Muallim,
yes,
which is intellectual. And Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe felt Zimbabwe to death. In one of your speech, he said almost 90% unemployment rate. And also, they don't have a currency at the moment, you said?
Yes.
How is that possible? A man of such a virtue, failed Zimbabwe. How I don't understand it. These are, most of them are highly educated scholars. At the same time, country after country failed in our continent.
You know, there are quite a number of tragic figures in Africa. Robert Gabriel Mugabe's credentials as a freedom fighter are admirable.
Yeah.
He fought gallantly against the regime of Ian Smith. And during the first 10 years of Zimbabwe's independence, Robert Mugabe was excellent. But history has demonstrated times without number that when you do not know when to leave, you then go down on a trajectory that is harmful both to yourself and to your nation. Had Robert Mugabe left after 10 years, I have no doubt that he would have been in the same historical pantheon as Nelson Mandela, Julius Kambarage Nyerere, Kwame Nkrumah, Patrice Emery Lumumba, Thomas Sankara, Bantu Stephen Biko, and many other African leaders, Amilcar Cabral or Modibo Keita. But he, for reasons that I fail to understand, must have been persuaded by the court jesters and courtiers to overstay his welcome. The net effect is that he became a soft target. This also we must never remember. We must never forget that he too became a soft target of those who did not like the manner in which he dealt with the land question.
Yes.
And then, of course, once you get angry and you have the international community aggregating together in order to attack your agenda, you become very lonely. You stand out, if you may, like a pink puddle, and then you are easy to cut down. And the net effect is that your economy suffers. The net effect is that your people suffer. The net effect is that you create disenchantment. The net effect is that you have the people rebel against you. And the net effect is that you leave the stage in an ignominious manner, in the manner in which he left the stage.
Yeah.
In what he was in. It was a coup d'etat, despite protestation to the contrary. One may call it a velvet coup d'etat, but a coup d'etat nevertheless. And I think the history and the experience of Robert Gabriel Mugabe should serve as a warning to other African leaders that leadership is a service, that leadership is a relay race, and that no matter how good a dancer you are, you must know when to leave the stage.
Yeah.
Robert Gabriel Mugabe did not know when to leave the stage, and he was removed off the stage. And that is what history will remember, because history has this uncanny habit of remembering the evil that you do and burying the good that you do. That is not original, that is Shakespearean, but it explains my point.
Yeah, it's very, very sad. Briefly, Chiro, beer is the same.
Yeah, 50 years after the independence of Africa, Africa consumes what it doesn't produce and produces what it doesn't consume. Statisticians and economists would say Africa is growing. Some would say at 5%, others would say 10%, like Professor Pierre Lumumba always says. But the truth is Africa is stagnated. Africa is suffering from schizophrenia, doesn't know herself. President Biya of Cameroon has been a great man, a great statesman, a lot of portfolio and high credential, well respected previously, but he decided to overstay, like he said. Same thing as President Robert Mugabe of Zimbabwe. As a result, the people are fed up, the people are tired, and the people want change. And these have risen to the point, corruption included, whereby the citizens are frustrated, they want him out. And definitely, I think that we just had an election in Cameroon. The result is not out, so I'm not going to speculate on that, but we are waiting for the result. But in the English part of Cameroon, which is the Anglophone area, there has been no school for 2 years. That area is on shutdown. So We are looking, we are watching, we are waiting to see how he's going to prepare his exit strategy so that history can judge him or remember him well, because at the moment history is not on his side, favor is not on his side, and the things that he has done, even the love that Cameroonians once had for him has been eroded.
Yes, great. I hope Camera will do better. Currently it's an election, right, in Camera?
Yes, we just had an election.
Who won?
The result is not yet out, but based off speculation, the opposition party is claiming that
Really?
they had a significant victory. It's worth noting that Cameroonians are tired, Anglophones included.
Yeah.
They want change.
Yes.
President Biya has been a president for almost 36 years.
Yeah.
And I think it's time for change. It's time for a new leader to take the country forward. And over this period of time, there is really no significant development that he has achieved as a president of the country. And when poverty and unemployment rate has increased, the debt rate has increased, and everything has gone backward. I mean, so the people at this moment, they are looking for change, and they want a new country. They want to take, I am a Cameroonian. I want to be in Cameroon. I want to contribute positively. I want to create an impact like Professor is creating in Kenya. I want to be able to serve Cameroon and make Cameroon what it ought to be. But the question is, how can you serve Cameroon when the government, the current structure, when the country I have this patriotic love for doesn't have that same love for me? Mm-hmm. It's reciprocal, you know. And we hope that whoever becomes the new president of Cameroon would make the necessary changes and would take the country towards the right direction, mm-hmm. and would create reforms that would better improve quality of life, good education, good health care, and the well-being of every Cameroonian in general.
Thank you very much. We'll pray for Cameroon. Professor Lumumba, in some cases, you almost approved the longevity of their staying in power. You particularly mentioned, I think, Rwanda. You love the president, you admire Rwanda, and you said it can be done. They are a role model for Africa. But why would you justify that President Paul Kagame can remain in office in the magnificent, yet at the same time Biya and Robert Mugabe stay too long?
I think that is the question that I've been asked on a number of occasions. And my argument was that in the case of Rwanda, we ought to understand Rwanda in the context of our history.
Yes.
We remember in 1994, there was genocide in Rwanda.
Yes.
Nearly 1 million Rwandese were massacred. And the world did not respond at the appropriate time. Mm-hmm. The obituary of Rwanda had been written. The world ran away. The African Union was eloquent in our silence. The United Nations eloquent in our silence. In their own way, the Rwandese, under the leadership of President Kagame and his comrades in arms, have succeeded in resuscitating Rwanda. Rwanda is like the fabled phoenix. And one needs only to go to Kigali to see the quality of the infrastructure, the reforms that have been undertaken in the banking sector, the reforms that have been undertaken in the education sector, the reforms that have been undertaken in the health sector. And one sees that these activities are beginning to gain root. And I'm aware that the Rwandese political leadership and peoples decided to amend the constitution and therefore to give President Paul Kagame an opportunity to serve for longer than was contemplated. But I've also said in the recent past that I would be very happy now to know that President Kagame is serving his last term.
Yes.
So that he produces a new generation of leaders.
Yes.
And I've heard President Kagame indicate that indeed this could be his last term, because it is in the nature of true leader that, and I think it is President Nyerere of Tanzania who said this, and I agree with him, that a leader is not successful until his successor succeeds.
Yes.
It would therefore be a good thing if after completing this term, President Kagame presides over succession. so that he becomes an elder statesman who becomes a repository of knowledge. And I believe that that is going to happen. He has demonstrated times without number. Of course, he has no shortage of critics, but there is a sense in which he has propelled this country in the right direction. And I'm contradistinguishing this with the beers of this world. The beers of this world have been in power for 32 years, and what they have presided over is effectively a civil war. They have created an environment where the country cannot grow. They have created an environment where the countries are indeed undergoing economic hardship. They have created an environment where young men and women have no opportunity to seek and obtain employment or to invent and to innovate. Essentially, therefore, they have not been a credit to their countries, and that is why they are not to be compared with Paul Kagame. The same case as we've seen with Mugabe, the same case we have seen with Obiang of Equatorial Guinea. Yes. So what he's saying, and this is how I want to be understood, that leadership is a relay race. One generation must prepare another generation, because all these individuals that we talk about, they are mortals. In the fullness of time, if they don't leave power, nature will deal with them by making them unable to govern, or simply God will take them upstairs so that they are no longer with us. And we will need the countries to go forward. And there is something to learn from a few African countries. I think Kenya, in this regard, with her problems, has demonstrated that you serve for your term and you leave. Tanzania has demonstrated this. Botswana has demonstrated this. South Africa has demonstrated this. Mozambique has demonstrated this. Malawi has demonstrated this. Zambia has demonstrated this. So that if you are to count African countries where political leadership has now recognized that longevity in power is detrimental to the countries, then you will come up with a positive result. The few recalcitrant countries which refuse to embrace this reality must know that they are on the wrong side of history, and as the saying goes, if you don't learn swing's law of motion, you'll sooner be jettisoned and you'll destroy the country. And I hope that that is what will happen in the countries where longevity is undermining good leadership.
Yeah, excellent. You know, I have a lot of important questions to ask you, Professor. But you are very, very strong, and I want you to answer this question for me, please. You abhor, you hate ethnic politics, and you abhor corruption. As you know, I'm from Ethiopia. Now we have a very serious problem for the last 27 years. And the country is divided by the ethnic line, and it is now the new prime minister trying to fix this problem. I'm sure you have experienced that in Kenya. In fact, in one of your speech, somebody approached you to organize an ethnic basis, and you flatly refused. Don't ever approached me in this manner. So please, the same thing with Cameroon, even though it's Anglophone and Francophone, I hate to use that word, but please tell us, Kenya suffer with that kind of problem as well.
You know, any individual who describes himself or herself as a leader and yet appeals to raw ethnic sensibilities as the basis of seeking support is essentially intellectually bankrupt. And when individuals are bankrupt, when they have no ideas, when they have nothing to put on the table of democracy, then they appeal to ethnic sensibilities in their very raw form. And what they do is to marshal the people who support them by telling them that other ethnic groups are dangerous. Ultimately, when one does that, then one has what I call the Yugoslavia effect. You divide your country into Bosnia and into Croats, and you destroy the country ultimately. The beauty of Africa, despite our diversity, is that in many countries we have succeeded in emphasizing the things that unite us and de-emphasizing the things that divide us. And Africa must be judged a little bit less harshly. Remember that the boundaries in Africa were drawn arbitrarily by the European powers in 1884. And when African countries attained or regained political independence, one of the very first issues that were canvassed in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, was whether the African boundaries should be redrawn. And I can still hear the voices of Kwame Nkrumah and Gamal Abdel Nasser and Nyerere resonating through the vicissitudes of time, saying, if we choose to redraw the boundaries now, tell us which countries would not be at war with the other. And that gave birth to the doctrine of the inviolability of the independence boundaries. But that notwithstanding, I'm not one who is going to say and will never say that belonging to an ethnic group is a wrong thing. Sure. No. The Oromo have every reason to be proud.
Yes.
The Amhara have every reason to be proud. The Somalis have every reason to be proud. And of course, the Tigrinya have every reason to be proud. What I am against is the denial of opportunity to any individual on the ground that they are from a different ethnicity.
Yes.
In fact, experience has also demonstrated that when people acknowledge their ethnicities, then they are better able to embrace each other. And that is why, therefore, when in 1984, under the administration of Meles Zenawi, the Ethiopian constitution was described as ethnic federation, I said, this is honest. They are acknowledging the fact that there are different ethnicities, and they are telling them, we are Oromo, we are Amhara, we are Tigrinya, we are Somalis, but we have chosen to live in the nation called Ethiopia. That is honest. The Swiss did it. In South Africa, they have recognized 11 national languages. So they are saying, yes, we are Zulus, we are Xhosas, we are Pedis, we are Sotos, and our languages are all beautiful, but we have made a conscious and deliberate decision to live in South Africa. In other words, we recognize that diversity is our strength. In Angola, we are Ovambo, we are Ovimbundu, and we have chosen to live in Angola. So that ethnicity in and of itself is not a problem. It is the negative ethnicization of politics by bankrupt individuals in politics which is the problem in Africa. And these individuals ought to be unmasked because they are simply ethnic warlords whose agenda is to occupy political space for personal benefit rather than for the general good.
Wow. Amazing. And you should establish the Patrice Lumumba University. I will be the first student to attend. I am serious. As you know, Professor Patrick, there are two schools of thought or views about the current condition of Africa. One is Afro-pessimist, the other is Afro-optimist.
Correct.
Afro-pessimist would point out Africa cannot even govern herself. She is corrupt and sick, actually. And look, Somalia, look, Congo, South Sudan, Cameroon, Mali, and Libya. Actually, some even say Africa should be recolonized that far. And you are Afro-optimist.
Correct.
How so? In your speech, you say that, Ethiopia and Kenya are importing maize from Mexico. Liberia importing chicken from Brazil. medicine coming from India. How could you be Afro-optimist?
You know, hope must never die.
Sure.
Hope is eternal. And when one is judging the modern African state, one must judge her not too harshly. The reason why I say so is that the oldest post-independent African country is Ghana. And Ghana is only 61 years of age. And if you look at the circumstances and the environment in which Africa continues to grow, it is a very difficult environment. In many African countries, the former colonizers have never stopped interfering. If you ask the French, they continue to interfere and in many ways to control the activities of their erstwhile colonies. And they have no shortage of individuals whom they use as agents.
Yeah.
So that many conflicts in Africa have also been manufactured from outside of Africa. Of course, using Africans. But let us not simply refer to the negatives in Africa. There are a number of African countries which during my own lifetime have demonstrated that they have the capacity to run the affairs of their governments in a proper way and for the benefit of their people. That is not to say that they are perfect, because no country is perfect. Even here in the United States of America, there are those who think that things could be better, and I think that is a good thing. The belief that things can always be better is what spurs us on. But let us go back to Africa. Look at a little country like Botswana, a country that in 1966 was a backwater country. Today, it has one of the strongest economy. I'm not saying there is no unemployment, but one of the few countries ever in the world to have a budget surplus. Wow. Look at Namibia. I know there are land problems in Namibia, but the truth is that they are moving in some useful direction. Look at Mozambique, which for a long time had a civil war. But we now know that Mozambique, her problems notwithstanding, is also moving in the right direction. And one can talk about Angola, which is now beginning to deal with the specter of corruption. One can talk about Zambia herself, which despite her problems, there are certain things that happened when the prices of copper went down, but there is a sense in which she is beginning to identify the things that ought to be done. Malawi with her problems with tobacco, but things are happening. Kenya with her own problems, but has succeeded in holding together. Ethiopia, from 1984 to date, Ethiopia succeeded to generate electricity. In the next few years, Ethiopia will be generating possibly about 20,000 installed megawatts. And if you go to West Africa, you can see Zambia, even with, or rather Ghana with our problems. You can see a stabilizing Liberia, a stabilizing Sierra Leone, a stabilizing Senegal, a stabilizing Ivory Coast. So that when one looks at Africa and talks about Africa as a basket case, it is a case of the half full glass and one choosing to say that the glass is half empty rather than half full. And indeed, if you look at the history of many countries, look at the so-called tigers in the East. There were days when the Koreas were at war. There were days when there were problems in that part of the world, in Malaysia. There were days when Vietnam was written off. There were days when Laos and Cambodia were written off. There were days when the Balkans were written off with Serbians and Kosovo and Georgia and all those countries. Africa, in my view, is beginning to recognize that for our long-term health, she must solve our problems. And this is how I understand, for example, the decision by the leadership of the African Union in the year 2013, when they came up with Africa Agenda 2063. Yes. And the Africa Agenda 2063 is a declaration by Africans that we have determined that nobody is going to solve our problems. We have determined that we ourselves have the wherewithal, both human and otherwise, to marshal our efforts and move in the right direction. And I have no doubt in my mind that Africa can and Africa will, And that is why under Africa Agenda 2063, one of the things that the leaders declared is one, that by the year 2020, the guns must be silent. The guns must be silent in Somalia, and efforts are moving in that direction. The guns must be silent in South Sudan, and I'm happy that President Kiir and former Vice President Machar have signed an agreement. It's still trouble, but I hope that it will stabilize. Central Africa, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, there will be elections in the month of December. We hope that in the Cameroon, sense will prevail and that President Biya will see the wisdom of living and resolving that problem. I've seen the recent rapprochement between Ethiopia and Eritrea. Yeah. It took only 6 months for the Prime Minister to recognize that we can resolve this problem. Yeah. Now we know that the Horn is going to stabilize. Yeah. Once you create another rapprochement between Djibouti and Eritrea, and the recent agreements that were signed in Asmara with the Somalis. Yes. So Africa is moving in a useful direction. And I myself take the view that we must remind ourselves that what we are seeing happening to Africa today has happened in other countries. Yeah. Countries have gone through civil wars and they emerge stronger. Countries have gone through depressions, trials and tribulations, and that the only thing that keeps countries going is the realization of the sons and daughters of those countries that nobody is going to solve your problems, you must solve your problems. And that is why voices such as mine and many others, which are a lot more eloquent and louder, are repeating this almost ad nauseum, saying Africa must rise and Africa will rise, but she will rise through the sweat of the brow of our sons and daughters and through the effort of those who mean well for her. And that means even Africans outside of the continent of Africa. It is going to happen. Perhaps not in our lifetime, but it will happen.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm converted optimist. Afro-optimist, actually. Yeah. Briefly, Chero, are you pessimist or optimist?
I'm optimist.
Yes. In what way?
Because I have looked at Africa. I've been privileged to travel across the continent of Africa, and I've seen a lot of significant changes that are going on, and I see a lot of great improvement. I see how Africa through Uganda, Rwanda, and many South Africa, and a whole lot, even Kenya, including Kenya, when I saw the peace accord between President Uhuru Kenyatta and President Raila Odinga to make peace and to put the nation first. That gave me hope. That brings to light the fact that Africa can move and Africa is willing to move, and I am very happy to see these changes. And I think with people like Professor Otieno Lumumba, he is a Kenyan, but he saw what was happening in Cameroon and he decided to speak up. Yes. This gives me hope. It tells me that Africa can handle her own problem, and there are still good people in Africa who can address African issues. So I think if us living in the diaspora can also come together as one and decide to put Africa first, I think we would really make Africa great again. And Africa will not only be great again, it would be the best place and the best continent in the world.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Professor Patrick, I studied political science. I understand emotionally why you admire Patrice Lumumba and Thomas. But I just want to hear from you why in particular those two people, although you mentioned many of them, but particularly you love those two leaders.
Perhaps it is not mentioned as often as I do, that I find great wisdom in Mwalimu Nyerere of Tanzania.
Yes.
And Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana. And the reason why those four individuals in a historical context make sense to me is vision. In the case of Nkrumah, it was his vision. You know, if you listen to Nkrumah and you read Nkrumah as early as 1957, he recognized that the process of decolonization was only a beginning. He recognized the artificiality of the boundaries that we had in Africa and therefore did advocate for the unity of Africa. And this was not naive. He was saying that we have experienced, in fact, at the time that he was speaking, he had been to the United States of America and he had seen that the greatness of the United States of America is in her unity in diversity. This is why the United States of America remains great despite her trials and tribulations. He had seen at that time, of course, he did not know that the Soviet Union will break up, but he had seen that the Soviet Union was strong because of her activities at that time. And he said, this new continent that is emerging from the wombs of the difficulties of colonization should unite. That vision makes him one of the greatest African politicians who ever lived. And if one were to doubt it, the things that we now find in Africa Agenda 2063 are the very same things that Nkrumah was talking about. That is why I think that Nkrumah deserves to be on the pantheon of great leaders. Mwalimu Kambarage Nyerere had an advantage that perhaps many African leaders post-independence did not have. This is an individual who became a leader. He himself says he was a teacher by choice and a politician by default. And he said he found a country with 136 ethnic groups, and he succeeded in his lifetime in welding a country together. Tanzania is unique. It is the only country in Africa that I know where leaders are largely chosen on the basis of their merit, not their ethnic extraction.
It's amazing.
They may have their difficulties, but in Tanzania it is possible to be born in northern Tanzania and to seek an elective post in southern Tanzania, and people will vote for you on the basis of the agenda that you put on the table. And he was one of the few African leaders who, at a time when he was very popular, was able to say, during my tenure, I made a number of mistakes. I apologize to the people of Tanzania, and I also leave office so that I'm able to allow others to perform and do better than I. He left the stage, although he was a good dancer and was still dancing well. Patrice Emery Lumumba was also a visionary. Emery died at age 36. And he was, as we know, brutally murdered, his body dissolved in acid. But when you read the history and his ideals, and he said it very clearly, that the beauty of what is happening here in Kinshasa, then called Leopoldville on the day of independence, is that no matter what the Belgians do to us, the Congolese are now going to write their own history. Patrice also belongs to that pantheon. Thomas Sankara is unique. 1983, he seeks and obtains power via coup d'etat, does things that had never been done before, particularly at that historical moment, says, why are we called Upper Volta? This land deserves to have a different name. We become Burkina Faso, the land of the upright men. Yeah. Why are we importing food? Why are leaders living in such opulence? Why are we importing medicine? Why are we under the tutelage of France? Can't we be our own? He goes to the African Union and tells them, why should we pay the debts? Is it not them who should pay us? Within 5 years, Thomas Sankara changed the psyche of the Burkinabe, demonstrating to us that the mind is the standard of the man. He stands in that regard. And lastly, there are many Africans. One can mention Samora Machel. One can mention Nelson Mandela, Bantu Steve Biko. But we are mentioning these individuals simply because history allows us only so much time. But they are great Africans. And that to me is a demonstration that African women have not stopped giving birth to good men and women. And therefore we can never give up hope.
Yeah.
African women and men are still giving birth to good people.
Yes.
There is no shortage of good men and women.
I wish if we have more time. Actually, it's the show is over.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Patrick and Chiro. It's been really a pleasure. You have been watching the African Television Network of New England. We had just a fantastic interview with Professor Patrick Lumumba. Until we see you again, thank you for watching, and ahlan wa sahlan, and goodbye.
Thank you very much.
ስለመታየቱ ማስረዳት መንገድ ስጪ ሁሉንም በሰዓቱ ፍቅር ፍቅር ሲያሰኘኝ ትዝ ሲለኝ ስሜቱ ቆይ ለምን አስፈለገ ማስመሰል መዋሸቱ ሰው ኑሮሽ እንደሌለው ላይም ስለመታየቱ ማስረዳት መንገድ ስጪ